Every year when November rolled around, I felt a pit in my stomach. Most people get excited for Thanksgiving. The turkey, the laughter, the warmth of family gathering around one table. But for me, it always meant something different. It meant sitting in a room full of people who made me feel like I didn't belong. And at the center of it all was my aunt, Margaret. Aunt Margaret loved to host. Her house was always spotless, her table set like something out of a magazine, and her smile, that wide, polished grin, was her weapon of choice. To outsiders, she was the perfect hostess, but to me, she was the sharp reminder that I was never truly part of this family. I was the daughter of her younger brother, my dad, who had passed away when I was 16. And ever since then, I guess Margaret thought I was less important, less worthy of a place at her table. She never said it outright, but the way she looked at me, the way her words sliced through me, always left me with that sting of being an outsider. "You look tired, Emily," she'd say with that smile that wasn't really a smile. Or "Don't worry, not everyone has to be successful like Laura." Her daughter Laura was the golden child, everything I wasn't. Stylish, ambitious, perfect in Margaret's eyes. And no matter what I did, I could never measure up. It wasn't just the comparisons, though. It was the little things. The way she always forgot to set a place for me until the very last second. The way she dismissed my opinions during conversations like I wasn't worth listening to. Even when my mom tried to stick up for me, Margaret had a way of making her back down with just one look. For years, I swallowed it. I smiled, I nodded, I told myself that it was only one day a year, that I could endure it. But deep down, every Thanksgiving chipped away at me. And as I got older, that pit in my stomach grew heavier. I remember sitting in my car that morning, staring at Aunt Margaret's big white house, my mom in the passenger seat adjusting her scarf. She gave me a soft smile, the kind of smile that said, "Please, let's just get through this." And I wanted to do that for her. I really did. But something inside me had shifted that year. Maybe it was the way my own life had been falling apart quietly in the background. The job that didn't work out, the relationship that ended without warning. Maybe it was just years of keeping my mouth shut. Whatever it was, I knew as I sat there staring at that perfect house with the perfectly manicured lawn that this Thanksgiving wasn't going to be like the others. Because this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. And if Aunt Margaret thought she could keep treating me like I didn't belong, well, she was about to learn otherwise. Walking up the pathway to Aunt Margaret's house always made me feel like I was on display. The neighborhood was one of those pristine suburbs where every lawn looked like it had been cut with nail scissors. Her house towered above the rest, white pillars, a double door, and that giant wreath she put up every year that practically screamed, "Look at me, I have it all together." When my mom rang the bell, I could already hear the chatter and laughter spilling out from inside. The door swung open, and there she was, Margaret, in her apron, hair perfectly styled, lipstick just the right shade of cranberry. "Happy Thanksgiving," she sang out, hugging my mom like they were best friends. Then she turned to me. "Emily," she said, her voice a little flatter. She leaned in, giving me one of those stiff one-second hugs, then pulled back with her usual inspection. Her eyes flicked over my outfit, simple black sweater, jeans, nothing fancy, and I could practically hear the judgment clicking in her head. "Well, you didn't dress up. Well, comfort over style, I suppose." I clenched my teeth. First comment of the night, and we hadn't even made it past the foyer. Inside, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon hit me, and for a second it almost softened my nerves. But then I heard Laura's voice from the living room. She came bouncing over, her hair perfectly curled, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my entire outfit. "Em!" she squealed, giving me a hug that was surprisingly warm. Laura was tricky, sometimes sweet, sometimes just like her mother. I never knew which version I'd get. Everyone else greeted me politely, but it was clear who the spotlight was on. Margaret guided Laura into the center of the living room, bragging about her recent promotion, her new apartment downtown, how independent and successful she was. And my mom and I stood off to the side, smiling politely, as if we weren't really part of the performance. I could feel it starting already. The same pattern, the same hierarchy. Margaret playing Queen Bee, Laura the golden child, and me, the afterthought. At dinner, Margaret loved to carve the turkey herself like some kind of ritual. But before that, she made a little speech, as she always did. She clasped her hands together dramatically and said, I just feel so blessed this year. My Richard has been working so hard, Laura is thriving in her career, and our family, well, we've never been stronger. Then her eyes landed on me, almost as if she'd saved the best for last. And Emily, she said with that syrupy smile, I hear you're still figuring things out. That's okay, dear. Some of us take a little longer to find our place, don't we? The table chuckled softly, like she'd just told a cute little joke. My face burned and I forced a smile. But inside, something snapped. Because for the first time, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt angry. And that anger had teeth. Margaret's words hung in the air like smoke, filling the room, seeping into me the way they always did. But this time, they stung differently. They didn't just remind me that I didn't belong. They reminded me of every Thanksgiving that had chipped away at me, year after year. I thought back to the first one after my dad passed away. I was 16, still raw, still broken. I remember walking into the same house wearing a black dress because it felt wrong to wear anything cheerful. Everyone greeted me with that awkward sympathy, the kind where they don't know what to say, so they just don't. And Margaret, instead of offering comfort, leaned down, smiled sweetly, and said, You really should try to smile more, dear. Your father wouldn't want you looking so gloomy at the table. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that my father was the only person who made me feel like I mattered in this family, and without him, I felt hollow. But instead, I swallowed it. I swallowed it the way I always did. The years that followed weren't much better. One Thanksgiving, when I showed up in a second-hand dress I'd bought with babysitting money, she looked me up and down and said, Well, at least you're thrifty. Everyone laughed, except me. Another year, I remember Laura unwrapping a fancy necklace Margaret had gifted her right there at the table. It wasn't even Christmas, but Margaret loved to show off. And then she looked at me and said, Emily, I was going to get you something too, but I thought cash would be more practical. She handed me a $20 bill folded in half like I was a kid. I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. It wasn't just the material things, though. It was the way she always compared me to Laura, as if my worth was a reflection of how much I lacked. Laura's already been promoted twice, Emily. Isn't it time you started thinking about your future? Or, Laura is just so confident. I wish you had a little more of that spark. Over time, it wasn't just about Laura. It was about me being invisible. I noticed how Margaret always set the table so that I sat at the far end, away from the laughter and stories. I noticed how my mom never challenged her. She just let it slide. Maybe because she didn't want to cause a scene. Maybe because she was tired too. But I wasn't tired anymore. I was angry. And what Margaret didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I carried something with me, a secret I had stumbled across years ago, tucked away in my father's belongings. At first, I hadn't even believed it, but the more I pieced things together, the more I realized it was true. A secret so big, it could flip Margaret's perfect little world upside down. And as I sat at that table, listening to her brag about Laura and dismiss me like I was nothing, I realized maybe this was the year to finally use it. Dinner at Aunt Margaret's was always the same performance. The table looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal glasses, gold-trimmed plates, candles flickering in the center. She loved showing off, and she made sure everyone noticed. I sat between my mom and one of my cousins, trying to focus on the smell of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and fresh bread instead of the gnawing in my chest. For a few minutes, things felt almost normal. People passed dishes around, clinking silverware, making small talk. But it didn't take long. Margaret thrived on attention, and soon she was steering the conversation back to Laura. "Tell everyone about your big project at work," she said, smiling proudly. Laura, never shy about being the star, launched into a long explanation of some marketing campaign she had led. Everyone nodded, impressed. Even Uncle Richard, who usually stayed quiet, chimed in with a proud, "That's my girl." And then Margaret turned her attention back to me. "Emily, what about you? Still at that, what was it again, temp job?" I swallowed hard. "I actually just left that position. I'm looking at some new opportunities." Her smile tightened. "I see. Well, not everyone can be as driven as Laura. Some of us are just late bloomers." A few people chuckled politely. My face burned. My fork scraped against the plate as I clenched it tighter. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt heavy, like I was drowning in their judgment. And then, Margaret delivered the line that pushed me over the edge. "You know, Helen," she said to my mom, her voice dripping with condescension, "you've done your best raising Emily on your own. It can't have been easy after Robert passed away. But at least Laura shows us what real achievement looks like. That must be comforting." The room went quiet. My mom's eyes darted down to her plate, her hands tightening around her napkin. And that was it for me. Something inside me snapped, like a rubber band stretched too far. I looked straight at Margaret, and for the first time in years, I didn't lower my eyes. "Not everything in this family is as perfect as you pretend it is," I said quietly. The room stilled. Forks froze midair. Margaret blinked at me, her smile faltering. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her tone sharp. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. "Just that maybe some of us know more than you think." The silence after my words was deafening. Even the sound of the grandfather clock in the hallway felt louder than the voices that had just been laughing a moment ago. All eyes turned to me, like I had just dropped a glass on the floor. Margaret tilted her head, her smile fixed, but her eyes sharp. "Emily, if you're implying something, I suggest you stop before you embarrass yourself." My throat was dry, but I forced myself to keep going. "I'm not embarrassing myself. I just think it's funny how people like to talk about success and appearances, but never about the things they try so hard to keep hidden." A ripple went around the table. My cousin across from me raised his eyebrows, Laura shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and Uncle Richard cleared his throat like he wanted to intervene, but didn't know how. Margaret gave a brittle laugh. "You've always had such an overactive imagination. Really, darling, this isn't the time for—" "Maybe it is," I cut in, my voice sharper than I expected. My hands were trembling under the table, but I kept my gaze locked on hers. My mom touched my arm, lightly, her voice pleading, like she was begging me not to go further. But it was too late. I looked around the table, seeing the mix of curiosity and unease in everyone's eyes. For the first time in my life, they weren't just dismissing me. They were waiting, listening. And Margaret knew it. Her smile slipped just enough to show the steel beneath. "You should be very careful," she said in a low voice, the kind that carried more threat than warmth. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of her. I leaned forward slightly, my words deliberate. "You like to act like you're the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect sister. But some of us know that's not true. Some of us know the secret you've been hiding for years." The air shifted, heavy with tension. Laura frowned, glancing between her mother and me. Uncle Richard's face was pale, his hand frozen halfway to his glass of wine. Margaret's voice cracked just a little when she asked, "What secret?" I let the question hang there, letting the weight of it settle over the table. I wanted her to feel, for once, what I had felt all those years: cornered, exposed, powerless. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Margaret's question, "What secret?" hung in the air like a dare. I looked around the table. Every face was turned toward me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible here. I was the center of their attention. I took a slow breath. When Dad passed away, I began, my voice quieter now. I went through his things, his papers, his letters, all the old files he kept in the attic. Margaret's face stiffened. She knew exactly what I was talking about. And I found something that didn't make sense at first. There were letters, notes, and proof. Proof that you weren't being honest with your family. Laura blinked. "Mom, what is she talking about?" Margaret let out a sharp laugh, but it sounded forced. "She's clearly confused. Robert must have left things behind that she didn't understand. He was always a sentimental man." But I didn't stop. I leaned forward, my voice steady now. "Dad kept records. He knew about your affair, Aunt Margaret. He knew that Uncle Richard isn't Laura's father." The room exploded. Gasps erupted around the table. My mom covered her mouth with a hand. A fork clattered onto a plate. Laura's eyes went wide as she turned to look at her mother, horror spreading across her face. Uncle Richard sat frozen, his knuckles white around his glass. He didn't speak. He didn't even blink. For once, Margaret's polished composure cracked. Her face went pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That is a disgusting lie," she hissed, her voice shaking. "How dare you come into my home and spread such filth?" But I didn't flinch. "It's not a lie. Dad didn't just write about it. He had letters, Margaret. Letters you wrote to the man you were seeing. He never confronted you because he didn't want to destroy the family. But he knew. And so did I." The table erupted into chaos. Cousins whispering furiously to each other, my mom trying to calm everyone down, Laura pushing back from her chair, shaking her head. Margaret slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Enough! This is absolute nonsense." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. And as I looked at her, the woman who'd spent years making me feel small, unworthy, unwanted, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. The dining room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped, chairs scraped against the hardwood floor, and the clinking of silverware was drowned out by the storm I'd unleashed. My cousins whispered furiously to each other, wide-eyed, my mom trying to hush me, her voice pleading, "Emily, please, let it go," but her words barely cut through the noise. Across from me, Laura shot up from her chair, her face drained of color. "Mom, is it true?" Her voice cracked, sharp with disbelief. Margaret reached for her daughter's hand, but Laura pulled away. "Don't you dare touch me until you answer me. Is it true?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. She tried to summon that usual commanding tone, but the silence stretched too long. And in that silence, the truth was louder than anything I could have said. Uncle Richard set his glass down with a heavy clink. For the first time all evening, he looked directly at me. His face was ashen, but his eyes burned with something I couldn't read. "Margaret," he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than if he had shouted. "Tell me she's lying." Margaret straightened her shoulders, finally finding her voice. "It's all nonsense. Emily doesn't know what she's talking about. She's twisting old family gossip to..." "To what?" I cut in. My voice was sharper now, steadier. To make myself feel better, to get attention? I don't want attention, Aunt Margaret. I never did. I just wanted to belong. But you made sure I never did. And maybe now everyone will finally see why. The room went silent again, but it wasn't the comfortable silence of a family dinner. It was thick, suffocating, charged. Everyone was waiting for the person who had been silent far too long. Uncle Richard's hands trembled as he pushed his chair back. He stood, slow and deliberate, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And then he looked at Margaret with eyes that seemed older than I'd ever seen them. "Don't bother lying," he said. His voice cracked, but it was firm. "Because I already know the truth." A ripple went through the room. My chest tightened. Margaret snapped her head toward him. "Richard?" But he held up a hand, stopping her cold.
He turned on her, his voice rising for the first time in my life. "Don't I? You think I've been blind all these years? You think I didn't notice the way you avoided the truth? I stayed quiet because I wanted to protect this family, because I thought keeping up appearances was more important than the truth. But maybe I was wrong." Gasps rippled around the table again. My mom sat frozen beside me, her fingers gripping her napkin like it was a lifeline. Laura's voice cracked, raw with betrayal. "So, all of this time, you let me believe—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Richard's face crumpled with guilt. "I loved you, Laura. From the moment you were born, I decided you were mine, no matter what. That hasn't changed. It never will." Tears welled in Laura's eyes. She sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Margaret slammed her hand down on the table. "This is ridiculous. You're humiliating me in front of everyone." Her voice was shrill now, panicked. She looked around the room desperately, but no one came to her defense. For years, she had been the one pulling the strings, the one controlling the narrative. But now she was unraveling, and everyone could see it. Her eyes locked on me then, sharp and furious. "This is your fault," she spat. "You came in here, stirring up lies, destroying this family." I met her glare, my voice calm but firm. "No, you destroyed this family a long time ago. I just stopped keeping your secret." Her face flushed red, her chest heaving with rage. For the first time, Aunt Margaret, the woman who had always held power over me, looked small. Margaret's face was a storm now, red, tight, trembling with anger. Every ounce of control she had ever held at family gatherings had evaporated in the wake of the truth. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is outrageous," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Outrageous! How dare you come into my home and ruin everything? You think you're clever, Emily, but you've just destroyed our family." For a moment, I froze. Her words hit hard, and I could see some of the cousins wincing, unsure where to stand. My mom reached for me again, whispering, "Please, Emily." But I shook my head. "No," I said firmly. My voice didn't waver. "For years, I've been invisible at these gatherings. I've sat at the edge of this table, smiled when you insulted me, endured the jokes and comparisons. I was tired of it. I still am. And this isn't about ruining the family. It's about the truth finally coming out." Her hands trembled as she pointed at me. "You ungrateful girl! Do you have any idea what you're doing? How you're shaming me in front of everyone?" "I do," I replied calmly. "And I'm sorry it has to be this way. But I can't pretend anymore. And maybe now the rest of this family will see what you've been hiding all these years." The room was silent again, except for the soft, shaky breaths of my relatives. Margaret's shoulders slumped slightly, a flicker of fear in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't the matriarch in control. She was just human. Then Laura stepped forward, wiping tears from her eyes. "Mom, I think Emily is right." Margaret froze,
her gaze flicking from Laura to me, then back to Richard. No, you can't! I already suspected, Laura continued, her voice growing steadier. I just didn't want to believe it. But now I know the truth. And I don't blame Emily for telling us. I blame you for keeping us in the dark. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She turned abruptly, her face pale, and left the dining room without another word. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my body easing slightly. For years I had felt powerless, small, like I didn't matter. And now I had finally spoken. I had finally stood up for myself. My mom reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, she whispered. And for the first time, I felt it. A strange, warm feeling of belonging, not because Aunt Margaret approved of me, but because I had claimed my own voice. A few minutes passed in silence after Margaret stormed out. The house felt heavy, but it wasn't the same weight as before. It was different, raw, unsettled, but honest. And then Laura returned to the dining room, her eyes bright, a mix of tears and determination. I need to say something, she said, her voice steady now. Everyone turned to her. I've suspected a lot of this for years. Things didn't add up. But I was scared to confront it, scared to admit that maybe my life wasn't exactly what I thought it was. She looked at me, and for the first time that day, I saw genuine gratitude in her eyes. Emily, thank you. Thank you for saying what needed to be said. You didn't ruin Thanksgiving. You saved us from pretending any longer. I felt a lump rise in my throat. All those years of feeling invisible, of being sidelined, of carrying the quiet weight of my father's absence, it felt like it was finally lifting. Uncle Richard gave a small, almost sad smile. I should have spoken up sooner, he admitted, but fear and habit. I stayed silent. Thank you, Emily, for giving us a chance to see the truth. My mom squeezed my hand, and I realized something important. Belonging wasn't about Aunt Margaret's approval. It was about being seen, being heard, being acknowledged. And for the first time, I felt that. Margaret didn't return that day, and honestly, I don't think she would have handled it well. But that wasn't my concern anymore. The rest of the family, those who mattered, were finally on the same page. We could rebuild, even if slowly, on honesty instead of lies. As I looked around the table, I realized that Thanksgiving had changed. Not because the turkey was burnt or the pies were imperfect, but because the invisible had finally spoken, and the truth had reshaped everything. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the outsider. I wasn't the overlooked niece. I was Emily, heard, seen, and finally, part of the family. That Thanksgiving changed everything. And though it was messy, painful, and far from perfect, it was the kind of change I had been waiting for my whole life. I smiled softly, looking at my mom and Laura, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the pit in my stomach. I belonged.